Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Ariancho, and these are my wide receiver rankings for Week 14. It's the last week before the playoffs. Accuracy is very important. So I'm going to try my best to get you into the playoffs, or at least help you secure that playoff bye and get the win. We're going to talk receiver, and before I get into the rankings, we're going to talk matchups. This chart on the screen represents the last 5 games for every defense in the NFL and how they've performed against the wide receiver position on average. So as you can see, there is a clear outlier on this chart, and that would be the worst matchup overall is 4 points less than the next worst matchup. The Eagles are a terrible matchup to draw for receivers. So if you get Philadelphia the rest of season, I think you should probably try to avoid that. Very concerned about those players facing off against Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Rough matchup there against Philly. And this week it would be the Carolina Panthers. So although Adam Thielen looks like a very good pickup off the waiver wire, I'd be very concerned to actually start him this week. I think for week 14, he is fool's gold. I think he's a big liability. Just a bench stash. I think if you start him, you are making a mistake. But not going to trust Leggett either in this matchup. However, the next tier of downgrades is not as difficult, but still it is more of a downgrade in general. League average would be 25.7, and I think it's really skewed by the Eagles number, but all of these teams still give up between 21 and 23.5 points per game. So the next worst would be Arizona, who get Seattle this week. So JSN, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett draw a difficult spot. However, JSN's been so productive, I probably still start him no matter what. And Metcalf, I looked into these matchup stats in division, really plays badly against Arizona. The last 4 games, he has been shut down by the Cardinals. However, every time Lockett goes into the Arizona stadium, he does find the end zone. He has 4 touchdowns in Arizona the last 3 games, but he's played really badly the last month. If you're ballsy enough to start him, maybe he is the veteran, not Adam Thielen, that you should play this week. But let's move on. The next worst matchup would be the Jets, who get Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle in division. Those matchup stats aren't that bad for them. I don't really care too much about this downgrade. Carolina would be the next downgrade, and that's for A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith. If you're worried about Saquon producing all of the numbers, then yeah, that's not the best scenario. But as long as they're both healthy, I think they're probably at worst flex plays with DeVonta Smith. A.J. Brown is never a player you're benching. Green Bay, also a tough matchup, but mainly because of Jair Alexander, who I believe did get banged up last week. I'm not quite sure if he will play in this matchup. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, kind of like A.J. Brown. You're always starting St. Brown, and then J-Mo is always in the flex combo as well. Buffalo, also a downgrade, but Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, kind of matchup proof, so not really relevant. Chicago is a tough matchup as well, but mainly it's one corner that I'm really worried about, and that would be Jalen Johnson. So the question is, who will he go up against, Jauan Jennings or Deebo Samuel? Based on name value, you'd think he'd line up against Deebo, but Deebo has not been anywhere near as productive as Jauan this season. I wouldn't be shocked if he lines up on Jennings, but my money would be on Deebo. For the majority of the game, I'd expect Deebo to draw Jalen Johnson. But the Dolphins, also a tough matchup. Jalen Ramsey could lock up Garrett Wilson this week, but maybe he's busy also covering Davante Adams. Maybe the veteran receiver, Davante Adams, might be shadowed by Ramsey instead. Maybe the age factor is a better matchup. You know, Garrett Wilson might be quicker than Ramsey, but both of them might be limited. The last downgrade I want to mention would be the Niners, who draw the Bears this week. So DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze, a slight downgrade for their offense in Chicago. But these next 2 matchups are on bye, and that would be the Colts and Washington. So happy to see some negative bottom 10 matchups off the board. However, that's only 2, and they weren't the worst. All the other matchups would be above league average. So this week we kind of don't really benefit from the bye week in terms of matchups, and especially in terms of upgrades, we miss out on the best overall at the position. The Houston Texans, shockingly, are the best matchup over the last 5 games. You would have thought their defense would be tougher. They're going through a tough spot the last month. So they're on bye. That's unfortunate, but New Orleans has also been a big upgrade. They did just face the Rams, though, and maybe it's not as legit. They did shut down Cooper Kupp last week. Maybe Malik Nabers is not as big of an upgrade as this would suggest. But Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, not tempting enough, but I guess, deserve an upgrade. The Chargers are a bad matchup for quarterbacks. They just caught 4 interceptions last week, but that does not go against the receiver position. They are a very good matchup on paper for wide receivers. So DeAndre Hopkins and Xavier Worthy do get an upgrade. Worthy had a very good game in week 4. That was the game that Rashee Rice did come off the field after Mahomes blew out his knee. So maybe that's a factor. Hopkins wasn't on the team yet. We'll see what happens, but the Chargers are a good matchup for them. The Falcons also a very good matchup, top 4 lately. So Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, huge upgrade. Could be an emotional game as they beat Kirk Cousins, their former quarterback. But the Chiefs also an upgrade for receivers. They're way tougher on the ground, and that's a big reason why. But without L'Jarius Sneed, they've actually been a legit good matchup this season, and lately it has been even better. So Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, and Josh Palmer do get an upgrade. This is interesting because McConkey just had a huge game in Georgia, his hometown. He's been nursing a knee injury. He has a sore shoulder. I would worry that McConkey is more of a decoy after a massive game last week. But do you really trust Quentin Johnston? I don't. His numbers against the Chiefs are abysmal, but Palmer actually has insanely productive numbers. Palmer has 2 games with over 100 yards on the Chiefs in the last 4. Palmer sometimes really does dominate this matchup. So he's an interesting plug-in. The matchup does deserve an upgrade, but how much luck are you really willing to bet on with Palmer? So good luck there. We'll see what happens. But Cincinnati, also a good matchup for CeeDee Lamb. We'll see who the clear number 2 receiver is, though. I don't know if it's Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert, or Kevontae Turpin. It might just return to Jake Ferguson. But in Cleveland, Denzel Ward, not the best matchup overall, but they have given up some deep passes. Marvin Mims just scored over 90 yards, a touchdown last week. So maybe George Pickens hits on a deep touchdown. He does play very well against the Browns at home. But Calvin Austin maybe gets an upgrade as well. He's dealing with a concussion. We'll see about him. Denver, also a positive matchup, but they're on bye. And I think that's kind of the end of the great matchups this week. These next 3 I will mention, but kind of a different tier as we trickle down. They're a lot closer to league average. The Rams are a good matchup. So Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, maybe Amari Cooper do step up. We'll see who's healthy in that offense. Tampa Bay, also a good matchup for Jakobi Meyers and Trey Tucker with DJ Turner going on IR. Maybe that's just more good news for Brock Bowers. But Jacksonville, also a positive matchup, the last one I'll mention. And they get Calvin Ridley, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine this week. Ridley gets a revenge game. He was a Jaguar last season. And Westbrook-Ikhine is on fire. He scores touchdowns at will. So I think both of them are actually very interesting starts this week. Not bad options overall. But there is one more chart I would like to show you before we get going. I'll try and be quick. I don't want to spend too much time on it. But these are the average points per game for all the receivers the last 4 weeks. And we are missing 3 players in the top 10 this week. That would be Cortland Sutton, wide receiver 6, Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 8, and Nico Collins, wide receiver 10 in points per game. So that's unfortunate. Those are key players who, if you need them to lock up that playoff spot, good luck without them. I hope you can piece it together. But there are some other interesting notes I do want to bring up. And obviously the player that stands out would be wide receiver 1, and that's Jamar Chase. But these next 2 are actually kind of shocking. Jerry Jeudy and JSN rank as number 2 and 3 on this list, both averaging over 19 points per game. Jeudy just went over 230 yards last week, but JSN is averaging 114 yards per game the last month. I kind of feel like it's legit. Maybe not top 3 rest of season, but I think they're warranting must-start status at the moment. I wouldn't be benching either of these players. The next 2 are tied, St. Brown and Puka Nacua at 16.8. No surprise there. Then it's T. Higgins after Cortland Sutton at 15.3. T. Higgins, a clear must-start when healthy. And then after Terry, Cooper Kupp comes in at 14.1. After Nico, this is kind of shocking. Wide receivers 11 and 13 are DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, sandwiched around Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Those 3 players are all putting up over 13 points per game the last month. Ikhine, if he finds the end zone, you know he's going over 10 points for sure. And then the last 2 games with the new offensive coordinator, Caleb Williams has been on fire in the second half, throwing a lot of touchdowns, and they've all been going to DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. So I'd absolutely be starting them, really trust them. However, neither player practiced on Wednesday. monitor their practice reps. That's a bit concerning. Don't love to see it, but I think they'll play. I think they'll be all right. Some veteran rest is my assumption, but not too many other players I'll mention, but a few outliers. Wide receiver 15 is MVS tied with A.J. Brown. That's pretty shocking. Right behind them is Jordan Addison, who's been really productive, but his teammate Justin Jefferson has been a huge letdown the last month, averaging less than 9 points. He's wide receiver 44 with 8.9, but he did go over, he did put up 99 yards last week, just one shy of 100, and I still think you trust him. Great matchup this week. I think Jefferson will return to elite status. He feels due for a touchdown. That's the only reason he has not played well. Touchdowns have been lacking. But same applies for CeeDee Lamb, who's right above him at wide receiver 43. No touchdowns for him, but still 10 targets per game. That is a red flag. I don't really see a lot of touchdowns in that Cowboys offense. It's so obvious who the ball's going to. I think in the red zone, you might even triple team CeeDee Lamb. Definitely let somebody else beat you than him. So I don't think Lamb will be scoring that many more touchdowns rest of season, but both of them you would expect come back to probably top 20 pretty soon based on who they are. But some other players that are really interesting that don't have this excuse of not scoring touchdowns, Jakobi Meyers and Ladd McConkey are both tied at 12.3 points per game. They rank as wide receiver 20 on the board here, and they're not scoring touchdowns either, so they both average roughly 90 yards per game. It's not a problem for them. It has been a problem for Lamb and Jefferson, but not quite ready to announce Jakobi Meyers and McConkey, the new CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson. But worth mentioning, interesting to mention, if you take out the game with the concussion, Cedric Tillman still ranks top 25, and not a name to forget about. Although he didn't play, we saw so much upside in that Jameis Winston offense last week. Tillman, I believe, is the number 2 receiver behind Jerry Jeudy. An interesting pickup, or at least flex play, if you still held on to him. But Drake London, Garrett Wilson, and Adam Thielen rank tied roughly at wide receiver 30, 31, 32, with about 10.5 points apiece. Shocking to see Thielen already on par with those 2 first-round picks. Much younger than Thielen. But Malik Nabers is tied with Elijah Moore at wide receiver 36. And if you're willing to start Malik Nabers, Elijah Moore, not a terrible flex play either. Those Browns receivers have a lot of value with Jameis. But then right behind them would be Marvin Harrison, also an interesting kind of letdown, honestly, like less than 10 points from Harrison. That sucks. But 2 players that are way, way lower on the list that I think will be getting way back into the top 30 pretty soon would be Brian Thomas, who looked insane last week. He almost hit on a house call and it was just overthrown, but he had 10 targets, only caught 4 of them, and still had a huge game. Brian Thomas feels like a must start, especially if Lawrence gets back on the field, but even Mac Jones gets him the ball. So I think he'll be coming back, but a rough month for him. He did get hurt a few weeks ago. Now he's healthy. I do trust Brian Thomas a lot. Zay Flowers is outside the top 50 himself, averaging 7.7, and that probably fixes itself pretty soon. After the bye, I think Flowers will be fine, but he's on bye. You can't start him. You can't start Michael Pittman or Demario Douglas either. And then right below them, at wide receiver 60 on the list, is Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel's been a massive letdown this season, especially in the recent history. Maybe it's recency bias, but I'd be very concerned about starting him. I think it's just name value that's making you think Deebo is a good play, but he has not been lately. That is very, very interesting. Tank Dell, also a huge letdown. He's on bye, and he's barely better than John Mechie. John Mechie's been averaging almost identical numbers to Tank Dell the last month. But players that didn't even crack 6 points per game, Rome Odunze, Tyler Lockett, and Romeo Doubs the last 4 games. So test your luck with them. I probably bet against it, but maybe, just maybe, they are due for a blow-up game. I'm done showing you the charts. Let's get into the rankings. There are 6 teams on bye, though, so any Denver Broncos, Houston Texans, Indianapolis Colts, New England Patriots, Washington Commanders, or Baltimore Ravens are not able to be started this week. They are inactive on bye. But let's get into it. At number 1, it was pretty clear based on those charts. Jamar Chase is the clear number 1. Not a downgrade at all. Good matchup against Dallas. I trust him. I'm not worried about Deron Bland or even Trayvon Diggs if he's healthy. But number 2, I did mention I think Jefferson is due, and the matchup against the Falcons does rank top 4, a big upgrade for him. I would start him. 100%. Definitely expect a big game. He almost had 100 yards last week. I think he'll play well against his former quarterback, Justin Jefferson, at number 2. Number 3 and 4, I mentioned in those graphs, are tied with an average of 16.8 points per game apiece. I got Puka Nacua and Amon-Ra St. Brown here at number 3 and 4. But I'm giving Puka the edge. His matchup ranks number 27, and St. Brown's ranks number 28. So just barely worse of a spot for St. Brown. But number 5 is T. Higgins. I don't think you can bench T. Higgins. If you have T. Higgins on your team, like I have him in the subscriber league, you know how valuable he is. He is a huge, huge piece of that offense for the Bengals. So he's not going anywhere. I trust him. I think T. Higgins will put up double digits no matter what every week. Love T. Higgins. Great, great player. Can't wait for him to be a Charger next year. At number 6, I think my start of the week would be George Pickens, though, versus the Cleveland Browns. Love this matchup for him. It ranks top 7. The Browns did just give up almost 300 yards to Bo Nix. And I think Russell Wilson will play very well. They lost a couple weeks ago in the snow, and the Steelers will bounce back. They're definitely going to win. Tomlin's been losing at Cleveland a lot lately, but he wins at home against the Browns. So it's going to happen this week. The Steelers will win, and George Pickens normally plays excellent against Cleveland. If you look at his last 2 home games specifically versus Cleveland, an average of 17.7 points per game, 8 targets, 3.5 catches, less than a 50% catch percentage, but still, those were all Kenny Pickett targets, 100 yards per game, 2 touchdowns, and I trust it to hit again. The numbers on the road are pretty brutal, an average of 6.1 points, 42 yards per game, no touchdowns, and that's pretty much exactly what he did earlier this season, 2 weeks ago in the snow. So he's going to bounce back in a major way. I think he goes over 100 yards. I think the deep shot does hit for Pickens this week, and it does turn into a touchdown, whether it's on that play or a red zone target. I believe Pickens puts up over 100 and a touchdown against the Browns this week. He's averaging 17.7 points per game against Cleveland, and they give up 191 yards per game themselves. They are a very good matchup here, and Pickens does rank as a top 15 receiver the last month himself. So even if he just puts up average numbers, he's going to pay off. He moves up a tier this week against Cleveland. At number 7, I think A.J. Brown represents the bottom of the tier. You're not benching him. Don't pretend like you're going to bench A.J. Brown. But Carolina is a tough matchup on paper. They're really bad against the run, and I see a blowout here, so he'll probably put up numbers in the first half. But if you told me A.J. Brown gets benched in the fourth quarter, wouldn't be shocked at all. And if you also told me that he only had like 60 yards and a touchdown when that happens, I also would not be shocked. So A.J. Brown with Saquon in the mix can sometimes not be the biggest factor in the offense, but still a must start. The matchup is bottom 5, and that's why he's at the bottom of the must start tier. But next, number 8 would be CeeDee Lamb, and he represents a tier break. I think we are not getting the same type of ceiling from CeeDee Lamb, but I did show you he was outside the top 40 over the last month in terms of points per game, but the volume is still there for him. 10 targets per game is massive. He also left last week a bit early with a shoulder injury, but according to Jerry Jones, they at least expect him to be practicing, and he should be available on Sunday. So monitor his practice reps, but if you have him, I think you are starting CeeDee Lamb. The volume's just too good. His floor is 9 points, and that is bust proof. I think at some point the touchdown will hit, but maybe it doesn't hit that often. I do kind of worry about it a little bit. But this matchup, though, against the Bengals is his opportunity to buck those trends. It's a top 5 matchup. The Bengals give up over 31 points per game, 11 catches per game, 176 yards per game, and 7 wide receiver touchdowns the last 5 games. The odds are positive that at least one receiver will score, maybe 2 this week against the Bengals. I still think Lamb deserves a top 10 rank, but I understand if you don't. I understand if you think he should be at the bottom of this tier, but I don't think I can put him any lower. With Terry, Cortland Sutton, and Nico Collins on bye, he does still rank in the top 10. Number 9, And 10, I have two veterans that I think you're starting no matter what. Mike Evans versus Las Vegas should play very well. I think the touchdown is bound to happen. Last week he went over 100 yards against Carolina, and he's playing at home this time. I think he'll be lights out again. I was tempted to put him over Lamb, but I think Lamb finds the end zone. So does Evans, and Lamb is getting more targets. That's my tiebreaker. But Cooper Kupp in the same vein should be fine. The matchup's the worst, though, for him of these three, and Kupp did play like shit last week. He was really locked up against the Saints, and for some reason the offense was terrible in the first half. The Rams were shut out in the first two quarters. I doubt that happens again against the Bills. At worst, the game script will benefit throwing the ball. So I think Kupp will bounce back. I'm not that worried. If it happens 2 weeks in a row, however, then maybe Kupp reverts back to his risk that he had last season. Last year was rough for Cooper Kupp. I hope he's healthy. That'd be my only concern. Kupp's a bit older, and he is injury prone. Maybe he's not 100%. Next up would be the pair of Chicago Bears receivers, who I showed you on the chart have been dominant, and mostly just in the last 2 weeks. These numbers do represent the last 4 games, but both are averaging at least 13.5 points per game. DJ Moore slightly better with more yardage, but Keenan does have more touchdowns, and Caleb really trusts both of them. I would keep starting them. I think as long as they're healthy, I would definitely plug them in, but worth paying attention to their practice reps this week. They did not practice on Wednesday. Neither of them did. So perhaps Rome Odunze will get more reps in practice and might be spotlit in this week, but odds are they both return at least in a limited capacity tomorrow, and perhaps they're upgraded to full on Friday. It's no concern. But DJ Moore does have a quad injury. Meanwhile, Keenan has an ankle injury. Make sure they're active. You want to know for sure. But definitely start them if they're playing. They've been lights out the last couple games. Number 13, another player who's lights out right now, is Jerry Jeudy at Pittsburgh. And just like JSN, I did show you they did rank top 3 the last month in points per game. Obviously, Judy's a bit skewed by last week's numbers, but I definitely prefer the matchup for Jeudy this week. JSN goes up against Arizona, and Arizona does rank as the second worst matchup for receivers, averaging less than 22 points per game allowed. He can still put up 10, and I wouldn't, downgrade him too much. But the matchup is the tiebreaker, and in his last 3 games versus Arizona, he is averaging 11.3 points. I think he'll be fine. I'm not too worried about his numbers, but both of his touchdowns did come at home, not on the road. That's my concern. I think at home, the Cardinals do play very well, and that's why I'm not ranking him top 10 this week. Obviously, Metcalf is still healthy. Lockett can always play well. I'll get into Lockett later. I think Lockett could have a big game. But JSN, I do rank below Jeudy because I really trust the Jameis Winston offense. They're going to chuck it deep like almost every play. And even if he throws a pick 6, that almost improves the game script. It always does. It really does for the receivers. They're going to have to pass even more. Now they're trailing by another touchdown, and there's less time on the clock than there was the previous drive. And now they're backed up another 40 yards. Why not just keep chucking it like crazy? So the interceptions don't count against Jeudy. I think he's clearly their number 1 target. They pay him a lot, and they traded for him for a reason. It looks like he really likes his new environment, but he probably won't go over 200 yards like he did last week. But a top 15 play, I love Jeudy and JSN this week. The matchup's a bit tougher. That's why I have JSN lower. At 15, I'm also starting Drake London, who I'm still going to trust. The last month has been a little bit disappointing, but he's still averaging close to 11 points, over double digits, and with only 1 touchdown, the floor is very high. You're getting 9 points just on catches and yardage, guaranteed from London on average the last 4 games. So I do trust him. I think he's a very good start. And against the Vikings, I think Cousins steps it up a little bit. His job is on the line. It's a big game for him, and London is his go-to target. I do trust London as a top 15 play. I wouldn't bench London at all. This tier is all must start as well. It's just not maybe the same as starting a guy like Puka Nacua. Number 16, Calvin Ridley versus Jacksonville, who gets a revenge game, and he's actually not been as good as Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. If the touchdowns that went to Ikhine all went to Ridley, Ridley might be the wide receiver 1 in fantasy, but he does rank as a top 22 player at the position last month. Still pretty good numbers for Ridley, averaging 12 points per game. So I trust the floor, especially in this revenge spot, probably goes over 100 yards. It will be raining, however. Maybe that does impact the overall offense. But I think he's earned your trust. The matchup against Jacksonville is top 11, and it's one of the upgrades this week. I think in the revenge game, I would be starting Ridley this week. Number 17, the last player in this tier, I think has earned must-start status because the volume is just so high. At the top of this tier, we have CeeDee Lamb, who I'm starting no matter what because he gets 10 targets per game. Well, Meyers gets even more, an average of 10.8 targets per game over his last 4. Huge volume, just like Brock Bowers. They're the two pieces of this passing game. And with Aiden O'Connell, I do feel somewhat okay about the quarterback production. It's not elite, but there's no other competition other than Bowers. And now Trey Tucker was placed on IR, another wide receiver target to compete with. The target tree is even more narrow in Las Vegas. So I will be starting Jakobi Meyers. He's the wide receiver 20 over the last month, averaging 12.3 points per game. And like I mentioned, bringing up Ladd McConkey, he's doing that without a single touchdown. 88 yards per game on 7 catches, almost 11 targets for Jakobi Meyers. I think you have to start him. At this point, he's a clear option with 6 teams on bye. I think he's top 20 for sure. This matchup's also top 10. The Bucks give up almost 30 points per game. Jakobi should be great. Number 18, I think we're dropping down a tier, but I'm still starting Ladd McConkey with confidence. He is tied last month with Jakobi Meyers without any touchdowns, averaging 94 yards per game. But I think last week may have emptied the tank a little bit for him. I'm worried he's very banged up right now. He's dealing with a knee injury. He also had a very sore shoulder last week. The telecast was bringing it up a lot, and he was grimacing all game long. He looked like he was very much in pain, so he does have some rest to recuperate, but still I think it got worse during that first half in Atlanta. He was not the same guy in the second half. So I'm a bit worried. He's more of a decoy this week. Trent McDuffie, not a good matchup, but in general, this matchup does rank top 5 against the entire position. They do give up almost 32 points per game overall. So I think he'll be all right as long as he's active. I would still start Ladd McConkey. I think they're going to really need to rely on him because J.K. Dobbins is no longer available. J.K. Dobbins on IR and Gus Edwards gets a terrible matchup. They have to throw it this week to have any shot against the Chiefs. So I think McConkey's a top 20 play, but monitor his practice reps. If he is not 100%, maybe I'll be moving him down in this tier. But at the moment, he's just such a key piece for them. I think his volume is very secure. Number 19, I also think Jayden Reed is a good start this week. Did score 2 touchdowns last week against the Dolphins on Thanksgiving. But Reed is getting back to be the number 1 receiver, especially with Romeo Doubs not available. I don't think he'll play. I'm not quite sure Doubs will suit up again. Doubs had a concussion last week, and he did practice limited on Wednesday today, but the game's tomorrow. I don't know for sure on Doubs. So especially if Romeo does not suit up, I think Jayden Reed's a very, very good play, and I would trust him above any other Packers receiver to score a touchdown. This is going to be a high-scoring game. At least it should be. If they have a shot to win, it's because the Packers put up more than 30 points, more than likely, on Detroit. So I definitely see a lot of opportunity here, and Jayden Reed is a top 25 receiver lately, averaging 11.2 points per game in his last month. So I do trust him. I think the touchdown is more likely going to go to him other than any other player, I guess, aside Josh Jacobs in the Packers offense. So it's Jacobs in the end zone, then it's Jayden Reed, and then Tucker Kraft and him kind of battle it out for that number 2 spot. But those are the 3 I would expect to score this week in Green Bay. They're going to need them all to find the end zone. Number 20, I have Brian Thomas Jr. at Tennessee, who almost had an elite performance last week against the Texans, but he did not connect on that house call. He was wide open. It was just Mac Jones overthrowing him, and that's just the nature of the quarterback problem in Jacksonville. But if Lawrence is active, then I would probably bump up Thomas a full tier here. Like, I think he'd be just as good as JSN, Drake London, 5 spots higher for Thomas if Lawrence is the quarterback. But even with Mac Jones, I do think he's going to be fine. I see a lot of volume with him, especially with Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis, both on IR. We saw Parker Washington get 12 targets himself. So I definitely trust these double-digit games in terms of targets for Thomas to continue. I absolutely trust him. I traded him away in the subscriber league a few weeks ago because I was so desperate for running back. And with the Mac Jones situation, his chest injury, I was like, well, I'm worried I'm going to miss the playoffs. I need wins now. I'll give up Thomas. But I kind of regret it. I wish I gave up someone else. I feel like Brian Thomas could be a league winner this year, possibly a top 10 option. I regret that trade, in all honesty. So I would start him. I know the numbers have been bad lately. Only the wide receiver 46 the last month, but last week was really encouraging. He will find the end zone this week. I think against Tennessee, he will be fine. I would be starting Brian Thomas. He's too explosive to bench. Number 21, another explosive player that's been really good lately, is Jordan Addison against Atlanta this week. A good top 5 matchup for him. I'm going to start him. I think Sam Darnold goes off, and both Jefferson and Addison will connect on those deep passes. Darnold chucks it deep. There's some big plays in Minnesota. I would trust Addison in this matchup. Number 22, I have Jameson Williams versus Green Bay, and I also like his upside this week. Narrow target tree. Perhaps Jahmyr Gibbs is in the doghouse on Thursday based on last week's social media post that was a little too private that went public. But I could see JMO really stepping up, especially if Jair Alexander locks up St. Brown. The matchup's tough against Green Bay, and they're obviously going to focus more on Amon-Ra. I think JMO could go lights out this week. Definitely some upside, but obviously some risk. Sometimes he does burn you. Number 23 is Tyreek Hill versus the Jets, who did score a touchdown last week, but it was extremely fluky. I do not rely on targets intended for Jonnu Smith to fall into the lap of Tyreek Hill for a touchdown every week. Last week was not that encouraging in terms of a misleading stat line. I don't think his numbers actually repeat like they did last week. So Tyreek does rank as a top 20 receiver the last month, but obviously last week is why I'm not buying into it that much. But with 6 teams on bye, I still think he's a good start. Against the Jets, it's not a great matchup, but in his last 3 games versus the Jets, he does average 11.2 points, and that's a decent high-end floor. So I would expect double digits from him. I do think Tyreek is still a good flex play. Not top 20, but still top 25. And 2 players in the same game I rank right behind him are Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams, and I think all 3 of these players are all kind of projected for the same amount this week. You can't say entirely for sure if Wilson or Adams will be the top player, but odds are whoever doesn't draw Jalen Ramsey the most will have the better game. And I think it might be Adams, given they're both veterans. Maybe they put more youth on Garrett Wilson, and Ramsey, I mean, could travel and lock up both players half the time. I could see that happening as well. So I think both of them are equally valuable. I think it's just a question of who scores a touchdown. Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams, both top 25. Safe plays. The volume should be there. I expect double digits from both of them. Malik Nabers does get an upgrade in terms of matchup. The Saints are the best matchup this week. They rank top 2 the last 5 weeks, but the Texans, number 1, are on bye. So good spot here. Almost 34 points per game available against New Orleans, and they give up over 190 yards per game to the position. I could see Nabers really, really perform well. So that's a good spot. Obviously, Drew Lock is a little questionable to trust, but it's just a question of if Nabers finds the end zone or not. Nabers is bust-proof, averaging 10.8 targets, 7.3 catches, 61 yards. That's been good for 9.7 points per game on average. But without a single touchdown, he does not rank as a top 30 receiver in that sample size. And even if he doesn't find pay dirt this week, I still think 9.5 points is a safe floor projection. I think Nabers is still worthy of a start. I would keep him in my lineup if I got him. The matchup deserves an upgrade. Maybe he finds the end zone because of it. But number 27, I think the last clearly safe option that should deserve almost a must-start status at this point, but more of a flex play given his age and maybe lack of upside, would be DeAndre Hopkins versus the Chargers. He had 90 yards on 4 catches last week. Really good player. And while Worthy has been stepping up, both of the tight ends also step up, and that's what kind of caps some of the ceiling. Similar to Nabers, I can't really guarantee a touchdown all of the time. Hopkins only has 1 the last 4 games, and it could hit, it could not. You really never know in this offense. Last week it went to Justin Watson, so tough luck there. It just didn't work out. But the matchup does rank top 3. The Chargers catch a lot of interceptions, but do give up a lot of yards, 178 per game to receivers the last 5 games, and 7 touchdowns as well. Maybe, just maybe, Hopkins does find the end zone. But his last game against them was last year with the Titans, and these stats are kind of untrustworthy, but 6 points, 5 targets, 4 catches, 40 yards, no touchdown for Hopkins last season against the Chargers. Maybe that's a similar stat line this week, but I doubt it. I think it'll probably be closer to 10 points, not 6. So I would start Hopkins. I think he's the last safe play that I think should be projected for double digits. Moving on, I think we're entering the lower end flex tier. I think there's more risk, but I still probably am going to start them over the average like flex play running back. I think there's probably a bit safer path for success for some of these players. Like Jauan Jennings is clearly the top target for Brock Purdy, and here at number 28, I don't love the matchup. I'm worried about a Jalen Johnson shadow, but odds are I think Johnson will mostly be lined up on Deebo Samuel. If Deebo lines up in the backfield, then yeah, Jennings is probably screwed on that play, but that's not going to happen 100% of the time. So Jennings is my preferred option. He does rank top 25 the last month, still averaging 11.6 points per game. That is on par with guys like Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson, and Jayden Reed. So I trust Jauan Jennings. I think even against Chicago, while it is a bottom 10 matchup, I would keep him in the lineup. I think Purdy trusts him the most beyond George Kittle. And with McCaffrey not being available, I think Jennings will still get roughly 8-9 targets, like he's been averaging the last 4 games. Number 29, I think DeVonta Smith is more of a risky flex play than like the clear top 20 play he was last season. It's because of the Saquon Barkley driven offense. They can always pivot away from him, and I expect a high score from them. Definitely a blowout against the Panthers, but if he doesn't produce in the first half, he might sit down early. He could get benched in the fourth quarter with only like 40 yards and maybe no touchdown. He could also have like 2 touchdowns in the first half as well. I wouldn't be shocked at all, but he is nursing a hamstring injury that forced him to miss the last 2 weeks, and maybe he's not available this week either. But if he plays, I think he's a top 30 option. Not the safest bet, but usually too much upside to bench. Kind of like Jordan Addison, I'd probably start him, but the matchup's not the best, and I think Addison's matchup's way better. It's kind of the same vein type of player, though. Wide receiver 2s with massive upside. But number 30 is DK Metcalf at Arizona, and he is questionable, but it sounds like he's going to be fine. He had a very dramatic exit off the field last week, but it was a very short-lived exit. He spent 2 plays in the blue tent and then was back on the field right away. So it looked like he might be done for the year, and now he's perfectly fine. He's still questionable, but I do expect him to suit up. But like I mentioned with JSN, this matchup is bottom 2, and I looked into these numbers in division. Damn, he sucks versus Arizona. Last 4 games versus the Cardinals, whether it's at home or on the road, it's always bad. 6.5 points per game on average on 6 targets, 3 catches, 35 yards per game, and only 1 touchdown. That's terrible. Like, yikes. You're getting 35 yards per game from Metcalf when he goes up against Arizona? I would rather bench him. I'm really worried about these numbers, but the name value probably keeps him in your lineup. If the injury is legit, then maybe I will bump him down dramatically. But it feels kind of weird to ever rank Metcalf outside the top 30. I know I've mentioned on the channel I think he's kind of overrated. I'm not like that shocked that JSN has overtaken him the last month or so, but I still think Metcalf is still pretty good. I still think he's a good flex play at worst, and he's always going to be at worst like top 35 now that he's the clear number 2 behind JSN. But these matchup stats are very concerning. I could argue you should bench him. I really could do that because I'm going to bring up Lockett's matchup stats later. Holy shit, Lockett fucking dominates this matchup on the road. So good luck with Metcalf. I'd be very worried about it. But similar to Marvin Harrison, who I rank right behind him, I think you're starting both of these players. In the same game, I expect a similar type of storyline for them. Yeah, they probably don't catch half their passes, but I think one of them could probably break open for like a 50-yard touchdown. I see a ton of upside with both of them, and Harrison does get a tougher matchup, though. Devon Witherspoon did just shut down Garrett Wilson for like 6 fantasy points, so I'd be worried. The first game against Devon Witherspoon just a couple weeks ago was also really rough. It was raining in Seattle. This game will be at home in a dome. However, Marvin Harrison was pretty bad. Only 6 targets, 3 catches, 47 yards, no touchdowns, 6.2 points. That's worse than what Metcalf is averaging in this matchup. So I'm actually very concerned about these two players. I think there should be a big warning label on Metcalf and Harrison this week. The matchup stats in division are terrible. You might only get 6 points from both of them. But in the low-end flex conversation, I get it if you think I'm like overreacting. They're still really talented. I get it if you're starting them no matter what. But at best, I think they're flex plays. I don't think they're must-starts at all. I do have very legit concerns for Metcalf and Harrison in this matchup. I could see a very low-scoring game in division in Arizona on Sunday. Number 32 and 33, I have both Bills receivers, Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman. And if you told me that Coleman does suit up for sure, then I would probably upgrade him over Shakir. He's been a bit more explosive, a bit more targeted down the field, and touchdowns have hit for him a bit more. Shakir, though, is a very reliable floor play, averaging 8.2 points the last month, but last week was a very strange snow game that I'm kind of throwing out. He usually puts up roughly like 9.5 points almost every week. So he's a very safe play, but as their offense gets healthier, it's a little bit more questionable who actually scores the touchdown. It's a lot of mouths to feed in Buffalo, and it could be a bit random. So I have them both outside the top 30. With 6 teams on bye, though, I would have expected to rank one of them higher. It's a question of if Keon Coleman plays, because the matchup is good. The Rams do rank top 10. They give up 7 touchdowns the last 5 games. Maybe one of these players finds pay dirt. It's hard to say for sure. Those targets in the red zone do trend more likely in favor of Coleman. So I think if he's healthy, I might bump up Coleman later on Saturday above Shakir. I see a bit more upside for Keon than Khalil. Number 34, I have Darnell Mooney at Minnesota, and I'm a bit worried about his quarterback situation. I could see Michael Penix be the starter as soon as next week, especially if they lose this game in blowout fashion. It could be rough on offense. I think London is really the only safe option. Mooney should be fine, but last week Ray McLeod also played well, and the matchup was far better against the Chargers than it is against Minnesota. It's technically league average, but obviously Brian Flores can give quarterbacks a lot of issues. So I have some legit concerns. I don't really trust the Falcons as much as I did a few weeks ago. So last week wasn't like the best, and if he doesn't find the end zone, then odds are you're going to get 60 yards plus, but that probably doesn't give you more than 10 points. So I think Mooney's just a flex play this week, not as safe as I've recommended in the past with Darnell Mooney. Right behind Mooney at number 35, I have Jaylen Waddle versus the Jets, another number 2 receiver that's very compelling, a lot of upside, but how much do you trust this offense? He's technically the number 4 option, especially now that Jonnu Smith appears to be the number 1 option. Tyreek Hill, I think, is still above him, and so is Devon Achane. Devon Achane is a big threat for targets in this offense. So I'm a little bit worried about trusting Waddle every week, but obviously we've seen his upside. He had a massive game a couple weeks ago, but the matchup against the Jets does rank bottom 3. It is technically a downgrade on paper, but if we look at these matchup stats, he actually plays even better than Tyreek in this divisional matchup. Last 4 games versus the Jets, Waddle is averaging 12.6 points per game on 81 yards and 6 catches, only 1 touchdown in that sample size. He's gone over 100 yards in each of the last 2 games versus the Jets. So maybe I'm too low on him. I kind of want to rank him closer to Tyreek Hill, maybe even above Jauan Jennings. I don't think I'm bumping him outside of this tier. I think at highest he would be number 28 in the rankings, but I kind of see this tier as a very flat zone, and betting on the touchdown against the Jets is not my favorite proposition to do. So at number 35, I think Waddle is properly ranked when you factor in upside and risk. And after him, I think now we're just chasing nothing but upside. Here is where I rank Nick Westbrook-Ikhine and Marquez Valdez-Scantling back-to-back at 36 and 37. I think it's really just the same argument with both players. Neither are catching more than 2.5 passes per game, but both are averaging roughly 60 yards per game, and over the last month, both of them have scored 4 touchdowns. Obviously, the streak goes back even longer for Ikhine. So I do trust Westbrook more. He is seeing about twice as many targets as MVS, but they're both catching roughly 2 to 2.5 per game. So the matchup is better for Westbrook-Ikhine as well. It does rank top 11 against Jacksonville, and it's a very entertaining proposition to be starting either of these players in your lineup. I definitely trust both of them to get those deep targets, and they've been hitting. It feels like it's kind of guaranteed for both players at this point. So yeah, it feels strange, but the hyphenated players I think are really interesting assets. At least have them on the bench. I would hate to lose in the fantasy playoffs with Ikhine or Scantling on the opposite player's roster. I would hate to see them going up against me that week. So at least stash them, but if you're desperate enough to start them, go ahead. Maybe you're out of the playoffs entirely and you just want to play spoiler this week, go ahead and pick them up. I would start both of them as interesting flex plays. I kind of feel like I'm ranking them too low. Like I could argue both of them are top 20 players. They both rank top 15 over the last 4 games. Ikhine is averaging 13.7 points per game and MVS averaging 12.9. Go ahead. If you want to, I would endorse Nick Westbrook-Ikhine and Marquez Valdez-Scantling as good flex plays. But number 38 in the same tier, I got Cedric Tillman at Pittsburgh, and he is still questionable. He did miss last week with a concussion. However, I don't expect him to miss another game because of that concussion, and I think when he gets back on the field, he slots in back as the number 2 target for Jameis Winston. We saw Elijah Moore go over 10 targets last week, over 100 yards, and Njoku also had like 17 targets himself. There were almost 60 pass attempts from Winston last week. That could easily happen every week, honestly. Like the Jameis Winston offense is super high flying, a ton of upside in Cleveland. So I would be definitely considering him, just like Ikhine and Scantling. I see a massive upside type of ceiling for him. And before his concussion, he was dominant. He was the number 1 target before their bye week. I think now that Jeudy has gotten more acclimated with Jameis, Jeudy is the number 1 guy. If you recall, Jameis was the backup quarterback. Tillman was also on the backup practice squad as well. So they had a lot of reps together and their early chemistry was established. But after the bye, Jeudy is the top target in this offense. But Tillman's not going anywhere. It's just his concussion that's been slowing him down. And at 6'3", 213 pounds, he's a tough guy to cover. So I think he's a great option. I think if you're desperate, I would be starting him, but at worst, keep him on the bench. I think if anyone dropped him over the last couple games, pick up Tillman, a very valuable asset. I think if you have an interest in Elijah Moore and Tillman's available, Tillman is by far the better option, but it's not that much different. Elijah Moore is still close behind him, and then Njoku and Jeudy are also relevant. How much volume is there actually in this offense, especially in the red zone? Can't quite say for sure who scores the touchdown. So Tillman in this flex conversation, I could rank him top 30 and definitely make an argument for it. He is tied in the top 23 over his last 5 games, an average of 11.6 points per game. I'm including 5 games because one of them he did suffer a concussion. Tillman has been really good. I would not write him off at all. But number 39 is Xavier Worthy versus the Chargers, a good matchup, and he did play very well against them in week 4. That was the game where Rashee Rice did get knocked out by Mahomes, a blow to the knee. But Worthy did have 73 yards and a touchdown in that game. It could happen again. The Chargers are a top 3 matchup at the moment, giving up almost 180 yards per game to the position. So Worthy is very interesting. I do trust Hopkins a bit more, but Worthy inside the top 40 does have a high upside. Sometimes, though, the floor is non-existent. You could get burned with Worthy. And if you've been starting Deebo Samuel, you've also been getting burned. He's been terrible lately. Not even a top 60 wide receiver in terms of points per game the last month. Only averaging 6.7 points per game. That is terrible from Deebo Samuel. So if you want to start him, do it at your own risk. I really don't want to myself, but I do have him in the same tier as Jauan Jennings. This is a very big tier. Jennings at 28 is at the top. Deebo at number 40 is the last name of the group, but I'm worried he draws most of the Jalen Johnson coverage. This is a bottom 10 matchup mainly because of that matchup, and I do think he's a big liability. He fumbled last week, and I don't think that'll happen again, but kind of emblematic of his rough stretch the last season. So Debo, it's just not his year. It's not really the year for any Niner, and I could see him have a rough game here. I think Chicago will make an effort to shut him down, and he's been really untrustworthy, so I don't feel good about it. I'd rather bench Debo right now. I think Kittle's the only must start. I think Jennings and Purdy are on the cusp of like flex consideration, super flex consideration, and then Debo is on the same realm as like Isaac Guerendo. I kind of feel like Guerendo is a much better play this week than Debo Samuel. But moving forward, I think we're entering the must bench tier. However, these are interesting dart throws. I could understand an argument for starting them. And you probably think I'm crazy for ranking Tyler Lockett here at number 41. Lockett, the last month, is only averaging 5.7 points on 3.3 targets, 2.5 catches, 30 yards per game, and 1 touchdown. That is the wide receiver 71 in that sample size. Terrible numbers from Lockett. He also gets a bottom 2 matchup. The Cardinals are very tough against opposing receivers. However, where I am encouraged, where I am swinging for the fence, is these matchup stats in division on the road at Arizona. If you look at the last 3 games at home versus Arizona, Lockett sucks. He averages 3.9 points per game. Write that off. Who cares? But on the road at the Cardinals, Lockett is the guy. 4.7 targets per game, 4 catches, 79 yards per game, so about 20 yards per catch, 4 touchdowns in these 3 games. He always finds the end zone. If I go back another game, he had like 200 yards against them and 3 touchdowns at Arizona like 4 years ago. But obviously he's much older. He's a different player. I wasn't going to completely skew the sample size with that game, but just look at it. Like, I'm not making this up. Lockett fucking owns the Cardinals in Arizona. If you're willing to buy into that, the average is 17.9 points per game. He's been shit the last month. He's not that much involved. It could absolutely blow up in your face, but if you're this desperate, I think Lockett's the play. I think in DFS, I'm going to be firing up Lockett a lot. I could see a very low roster percentage for Lockett. And if this persists, I think he could have a huge game. Fuck it. Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 41. Number 42, I got Adam Thielen, another veteran who gets a terrible matchup against the Eagles. The biggest downgrade. I think Thielen absolutely gets shut down by the Eagles. I have no confidence in Thielen at all. I think last week was not the stats you want to chase. I'd pick him up. I'd love to have him on the bench for the playoffs. But this week against the Eagles, do not trust it at all. They only give up 100 yards per game to the position, and I don't see like any more than 30 going to Thielen this week. I really do not trust him at all. Quinion Mitchell will lock him down. Do not start Thielen, but last week keeps him in this dart throw territory. Like, there's just as many reasons not to start Thielen as there are Tyler Lockett. It's just kind of flipped. With Lockett, it's all about this matchup. With Thielen, the matchup is the reason not to start him. But at 43, Christian Watson also plays well in this matchup. He averages 11.4 points per game. Last year, he did start off the game with a 50-yard catch on Thanksgiving against Detroit. So could happen again. I could definitely see him have some explosive plays this week. They're going to need some shots down the field, and those most often go to Watson. So an interesting dart throw, but obviously a liability in general. He doesn't have a single touchdown last month, and without a game where he went over 150 yards, he's done very, very little. Not a reliable player in general. So press your luck. It's interesting. Maybe it works out, but I doubt it. And at 44, go ahead and press your luck with Parker Washington if you would like. I'd definitely consider picking him up. He had 12 targets from Mac Jones last week, and both Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis are on IR. I definitely see a role for Washington. He will at least be on the field running routes. So an interesting play. I wouldn't be starting him, but just like Lockett, there is an argument to be made. At 45, there's also an argument for Rome Odunze, who's been terrible the last 2 games. The offense is very much shifted in favor of Keenan and DJ Moore, but neither of those 2 players practiced on Wednesday. They're both injured at the moment, and maybe, just maybe, they don't play on Sunday. So maybe Rome gets a lot of practice reps with Caleb that really spotlights him in the game plan this week. Perhaps Rome has a good game, but he's been bad lately, averaging less than 6 points. I would pass on Odunze unless both Keenan and DJ Moore are inactive. Maybe if just one of them, like if only Keenan doesn't play, maybe Odunze is a good start. But Elijah Moore also in this vein, similar to Tillman, very high upside, but I think with Tillman coming back, I'd rather pass on Elijah Moore. I don't trust him as much as Njoku or Cedric Tillman. Definitely not as much as Jeudy. But 47 is Amari Cooper, who's been pretty brutal in this offense. Injuries are a big reason why, but he's also not like the most acclimated player to this scheme. It's not like he has a ton of practice reps compared to other players. So Amari Cooper, I'm not trusting, but I get it if you're desperate enough to go for it. And then at 48, the last player in this tier, I don't think you can start Josh Palmer, but I did bring this up earlier. Lad McConkey's very banged up. Quentin Johnston sucks, not a trustworthy option at all. And Palmer actually really plays well against the Chiefs. There are 2 games against the Chiefs where he has a total 3 touchdowns and over 100 yards in each of them. There are some massive, massive games for Palmer against the Chiefs. And he did catch a 2-point conversion last week, so maybe in the red zone he is the safer target. I do see Will Dissly stepping up, but if Ladd is truly not 100% and is used as a decoy against Trent McDuffie, Palmer will need to step up. I could see a lot of volume going towards Josh Palmer. I could see them saving him for this game, knowing he plays well in this spot. So an interesting flyer, but just like Tyler Lockett, like you really need to stretch the imagination to feel confident knowing it'll happen. But there are stats that point to all of these players having relevant games this week. But that's what this tier represents, a lot of risk, maybe some reward if you're willing to take that chance. But moving forward, I'm definitely benching all of these players. I got Romeo Doubs at Detroit, number 49, and maybe he has the role that I'm envisioning for Jayden Reed or Christian Watson, but he's been banged up. He did practice limited yesterday, but I don't expect him to suit up on Thursday. He has dealt with a concussion that held him out last week. But Trey Tucker probably gets a few more targets now that DJ Turner is on IR, but still I'm not starting the 3rd target in Las Vegas. These last 10 really just shooting for a touchdown, but no thanks with them. Calvin Austin might not even play. He has a concussion at the moment, but if he does suit up, the Browns are a good matchup. He did have a touchdown in week 12, 2 weeks ago in the snow on Cleveland. But number 52, always praying for a touchdown with Demarcus Robinson. It has evaporated, though. Unlike MVS and Ikhine, Robinson not scoring anymore. Tim Patrick with Khalif Raymond on IR should probably get a few targets. He's actually kind of interesting, but not going to start him most likely, only in DFS probably. But Andre Yoshivas sometimes scores a touchdown. Ray-Ray McCloud also gets involved. Brandon Cooks scored a touchdown last week, but now that he's healthy, I don't really know exactly who's the number 2 receiver. I'd probably pass. But Kevontae Turpin right behind him, a huge deep shot touchdown is waiting to happen. He's very fast, but I think I'd rather go Brandon Cooks. Darius Slayton also a deep shot waiting to happen, but probably not going to happen. The Saints are a good matchup, however. And then Sterling Shepard gets a lot of volume, but they're all checkdowns, rarely less than 10 yards per catch. And then Leggett against Philly, no effing chance. You need a touchdown. And that probably does not happen. So those are my rankings this week at receiver, all of my top 60 players here on the screen. And with 6 teams on bye, it does get a little dicey outside the top 30. But a lot of the players missing aren't really like playing super well lately. Like many of them don't even put up more than 10 points the last month. So without the top 3, Nico, Terry McLaurin, and Cortland Sutton, it's not that impactful in terms of buys. But the tier breaks, I think, are very significant in terms of trustworthiness this week. I think the top 7 are automatic starts. I love George Pickens. Everybody else is always in your lineup. But Pickens, I think, will have a great game. I think he does warrant that elite status this week. But that next tier, definitely high-end options as well. Definitely trust them to go over 12 plus points. They're all averaging that themselves, with the exception of CeeDee Lamb. But definitely trusting those players. The top 17, I think, are all locks in your lineup. And then 18 through 27 are a bit more in the flex conversation, but still reliable low-end wide receiver 2s. Maybe some risky propositions, whether it's health or volume for some of these options. But overall, I still think they've earned your trust. I would be starting them this week. However, starting with Jauan Jennings all the way through Deebo Samuel, the flex tier I have here from 28 to 40, those are risky options. There's a world where they really pay off, but a little touchdown dependent, and some of them have massive ceilings like MVS, Cedric Tillman, Westbrook-Ikhine could really pop off, but I'm also envisioning some risk and red flags as well for all of them, especially guys like Metcalf and Marvin Harrison Jr. So good luck this week. Definitely going to need it, but those are the interesting, reliable flex plays I'd probably trust. But if you're super desperate, go ahead and take a shot on guys like Tyler Lockett, Josh Palmer, Parker Washington, and maybe, just maybe, Rome Odunze gets an upgrade as well. But starting with Romeo Doubs, that's the cutoff point. There is no chance in hell I think I'm starting any of them if it's not DFS, and I'm just looking for a cheap option in terms of that salary on like DraftKings or FanDuel. So that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. If you still have any questions, go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. But that's it. My name's Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.